talk to independent statistician and political commentator Jamie Jenkins. Good evening, Jamie.
Good evening, Kev. How are you doing? You good?
I'm good, mate. Used to be at the Office of National Statistics, so you're the man to talk to. In terms of the sheer numbers involved here, unless something is done to drastically reform the NHS, it is never going to get out of this hole, is it?
No, I don't think it is, Kevin. And remember now, the numbers that we're talking about here is just England. If you start chucking on the same problems you've got in Scotland and the same problems you've got in Wales and Northern Ireland, you're going to be well over 15 million. And it clearly shows that this isn't just a party political problem. This is going across different parts of the nations where you've got different parties in charge. Of the Labour Party and the SNP running Wales and Scotland, for example. So it's probably wondering where these numbers come from. So I'll probably just explain a little bit about it. So we started collecting these numbers in 2007 and the lowest waiting times we saw was in 2009. So it's about 2.3 million people were on waiting lists then. And what we've got, Kev, is we've got this aging population. And when you get advances in healthcare as well, we can probably treat people for things now that we couldn't do a decade ago. So more and more people are coming forward. And when we went into the pandemic, it was about 4.4 million people on waiting lists. So it's currently 5 million, just over 5 million. So it wasn't very good before the pandemic. But what the pandemic's done, Kev, is kind of, we know it's been perhaps the NHS COVID service over the past year. And even at the moment, Kev, we've still got waiting lists would normally have gone up pre-pandemic about 1.6 million every month, which is a staggering number to think about it. 1.6 million would go on. But the first month after lockdown, we only saw 400,000 people go onto the waiting list because practically the country shut down. Nobody went anywhere near the NHS. So what they've estimated here is that all these people who haven't come forward, he said, well, Sajid Javid just said about 7 million people. And if we don't basically get the NHS working to what it was pre-pandemic, the numbers are going to keep going up and up and up. And by 2025, we could be well into 15 million people. And the only way you're going to fix this is basically, you have to put more money into it, but we know money isn't going to solve everything. I think we need probably a root and branch review of the whole NHS, because throwing more money at something that isn't probably working isn't going to be the right solution.
Yeah, they always stomp and scream and say, give us more money. Well, we put vast amounts of money into the NHS every year. I mean, over 100 billion. It's an enormous amount of money. So it isn't the problem, but money is not the problem. It's efficiency. I mean, do you think, here's another statistic for you, Jamie. I mean, does the NHS really need to employ 1.5 million people? 1.5 million employees? This is what I'm talking about. We need to look at this organisation and say, do we need all these employees? Do we need these huge numbers of middle managers on six-figure salaries doing jobs you can't quite understand? We need to streamline this organisation, and we need to make it efficient and to get on with doing what it's supposed to do, and that's treat people.
Well, I think you bang on, Kev, because I know I got family who work in the NHS and they tell me the stories of all these managers within the NHS. Obviously, the managers aren't treating patients. They're adding this layer of bureaucracy. They're taking away funding from people on the front line. You know, we were talking recently about NHS pay rises and the like. Well, if we could have had it more efficient and more people on the front line and fewer managers, maybe you could increase the wages. I think what we've reached now, Kev, over the last kind of year or so, is we had the mantra, didn't we, back at the start of lockdown about protect the NHS. And people were too scared to go to the NHS. And the staggering statistics out again today from the ONS. If you track every week now, Kev, since the start of the pandemic, we've had more people dying at home than we would have had. We talk about excess deaths from COVID, but if you just look at deaths from home and compare that to before the pandemic, we've had every single week now since the start of the pandemic, even when we've had low rates of COVID, more people dying at home than that would have died before the pandemic. And if you total it all up, it's over 65,000 people. Now, this is probably a national scandal. Are these people too scared to go forward? Because if you look on the flip side of the numbers, Kev, we've seen fewer people dying in hospital since kind of March this year. So people aren't dying in hospital, they're dying at home. So we talk about these waiting lists might go up, Kev. I think the key thing is we're probably not going to see all the people who've missed treatment coming forward for treatment over the next years, because sadly, some of them already died. And this is a national scandal, basically, I think.
It really is, and they overplayed this protect the NHS card to such an extent, as you quite rightly say. Seriously sick people thought, I mustn't go and bother the NHS, and that was a bad message to send. And frankly, never mind protecting the NHS. It's the NHS's job to protect us, to treat the sick, and I think people are a little bit sick of being told to kneel down and bow to the holy grail of the NHS. As this health service stands, Jamie, tell me what you think, but I just think it's not fit for purpose. It cannot clear these waiting lists set up in the way that it is. So we need to reform it, as you said, root and branch, and we need to do it very, very quickly, don't we?
Well, yeah, Kev, we need to do that. But I think part of the problem you have every time there's a general election, there's always kind of talking about the NHS. It's kind of seen as this religious kind of thing that you can't do anything to the NHS. The only way we're going to fix this, Kev, is if the Labour Party, the Tory Party, all the parties, it's a bit like social care. Nobody will touch social care with the barge pole as well because they're all worried about losing votes. You kind of need a cross-party approach to fixing this. I live in Wales. It's the exact same problem in Wales where Labour run the NHS as in England where the Tories run the NHS. So we're only going to solve this if we can put more money in potentially, but it's not just more money into a cesspit of more money, of going into kind of more managerial stuff. We need to better look at where the money's going now. You hit the nail on the head. We've got well over 100 billion going into this. If we don't get the reform acting quickly, these numbers are going to go up. And we're talking, if you want to try and get the waiting lists back to pre-pandemic levels, Kevin, I mean, they weren't very good then. What they're going to need to do is kind of see at least 800,000 more patients than they are now next year and 1.6 million more in the following year. But where are the staff going to come from to do all of this as well?
Exactly right. But we need to reform it, and we need to reform it in a sort of almost a ruthless way. And we've got to stop worshipping the NHS. We go around saying, our amazing NHS, it's the greatest health service in the world. It is very, very far from that. We have a completely wrong impression of our NHS. It needs to be sorted out. And as you rightly say, Jamie, these waiting lists are turning into a national scandal. I hope we can sort it out, but we're never going to sort it out the way we approach the NHS right now. Great to talk as always, mate. Thank you very much. Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician and political commentator, formerly top brass at the Office of National Statistics.